How's it going, everybody? I'm glad you're here. Happy belated 2024. We've gone through another year of cinema and filmmaking, and this year has also been one of the best in a while. The 20s have obviously been an extremely weird decade for everybody, but especially in the filmmaking world, and most of the years have been okay. But we've also gotten steadily better as the decade has gone on, and I think 2023 has been the best year so far this decade. So I'm super excited to talk about my favorite films of the year today. I'm not gonna be talking about every film I've seen in the year anymore because I don't got time for that. Those videos are so long. And on top of that, if I wasn't talking about one of the best movies of the year or one of the worst movies of the year, just the films that kind of fell in between, I realized that I wasn't really talking about them with a ton of nuance or intricacy. And I don't really want to do that anymore. I want to make sure that I'm talking about films that I'm passionate about, and I want other people to be passionate about as well. I'm not anti-worst lists at all. I think worst films of the year lists can be really helpful because even though on an artistic level these films might not have a lot to offer, they still have something to teach you. There's still something to learn for bad movies, and I always recommend people watch bad movies so that they can learn things from them. But I'm not going to be talking about those in this video today. I'm going to be talking about all the films that I would give an 8 out of 10 or above, the films that I would consider great. I'm only going to be talking in detail about my top 20, but I gave 34 films an 8 out of 10 or above this year. So I'm going to highlight 34 through 20 super quick, just mention what they are, and then I'll start talking about the top 20 and a lot more depth. So without any further ado, let's just jump right in. Our honorable mentions today are How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Eileen, The Boy and the Heron, Blackberry, Bottoms, Infinity Pool, Air, Maestro, American Fiction, When Evil Lurks, The Killer, Sometimes I Think About Dying, Beau is Afraid, and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. All right, that was number 34 through 21, so without any more further ado, let's just jump right in at number 20. Barbie had the potential to be pretty insufferable, and so the fact that it wasn't already was a pleasant surprise, but the fact that I loved it as much as I did was an even bigger surprise. What sets Barbie apart from many other films like it in its same vein is that it has its target audience, and it rightfully so plays heavily into that target audience and caters to them to the nth degree, but also below the surface, it has something for everybody else that's going to see it. And its script is smart enough to let these ideas and these themes that are being catered to everybody else happen subconsciously underneath the film and let everything else about it speak for itself, because the film should still be fun at its core. It's not trying the whole time to be something deep and thought-provoking and really cerebral. Half the time you don't really realize you're soaking any of these aspects in because you're so focused on how bright and colorful and loud and unsubtle this world is by design, so that by the time these things at the end of the film hit, they really hit. The film can get a little mean-spirited at times, but again, by the last final 5 minutes, I really didn't care because I was so moved by the ending, which was brilliantly written, by the way. Like I said, these seeds were sprinkled at the start of the film and didn't really come to a head towards the end when they needed to, and that makes everything so much more emotionally cathartic. I was really happy that this wound up being the biggest film of the year because culturally it certainly deserves it, but critically it might deserve it even more. As typical with Michael Mann, Ferrari has been and will continue to be very divisive, and I think the biggest reason for that is most films like it in terms of biopics and biopics about tortured, flawed geniuses with a dark side and a past and a family that hates him. Movies like that end where this one starts. Most of these characters have already hit rock bottom. They've accepted the fact that their lives are going nowhere. They have irreparable relationships. They have no intention of fixing anything. They're essentially just miserable people at the start of this. And this, again, usually happens at the end of most of these movies like this. And when it starts like that, it's so quiet and it's so unnerving, and it can be very unsettling at times, especially for a film about racing. This film is extremely quiet, and I can see how that can turn a lot of people off. It's a film about grief and how we process it so quietly. It's about legacy and ego and masculinity and family and about a million other different things before it's about the racing. It's extremely unique, and I can understand how someone can be turned off by that, especially how purposely emotionally distant the film can sometimes feel, but I for one have not stopped thinking about it since I saw it. I have thought it was incredibly thought-provoking. It has electric direction, some of the best sound design of the whole year, especially in one scene towards the end that caused several audible gasps in my theater. Ferrari was a big hit for me. Dream Scenario was one of the most overlooked films of the year. Nicolas Cage's performance here is absolutely Oscar-worthy, but unfortunately the film doesn't really have the notoriety to garner him a nomination, but I certainly thought he was out of this world fantastic. He's so funny. All of the comedy in this film is fresh and it's genuinely hilarious. The editing is insanely sharp and quick, and it adds and complements the tone of the film and makes all of the comedy even more funny. The film gets dark when it needs to, but it still managed to maintain its comedic tone throughout. You're never really feeling like, as an audience member, you're struggling to find out what you should be feeling at any given moment. I found this film to be very, very special, and it's a shame that not a lot of people are talking about it because it came out towards the end of the year with a lot of all these other big projects, so it kind of got swept under the rug. So if you haven't seen this yet, I would definitely check it out. I think that most people would find this very, very funny. The Iron Claw was one of the biggest surprises of the year for me in more ways than one. I knew a decent amount about the Von Erich family's story before sitting down to watch this film. So when I had heard about this movie coming out, and I heard about when it was coming out, and how much focus they were going to be putting on the tragedy of the Von Erich family, my mind immediately went to this being some kind of borderline disrespectful Oscar bait nonsense, like a lot of films that come out towards the end of the year about stuff like this are, and I was so happy to be proven so wrong. I only counted one Raging Bull homage, and it was just the opening scene of the movie, and the rest of the film feels completely original and singular. The directing is so understated and quiet. Even the wrestling sequences have this sort of dreamy, spiritual quality to them. Even in these big, loud moments, it feels like you're watching everything in slow motion almost, which really adds to that style. It almost feels like the way you would experience a dream, or in this case, towards the end of the film, a nightmare. The shot in this film that has stuck with me the most is a wide, because there's a lot of wides in this film to highlight the understated direction and the themes that this film wants to explore. It's right after a big fight involving three of the brothers, Jeremy Allen White, Zac Efron, and the other guy, I don't know his name, the third brother that was wrestling, right? And they've just finished and they've won, and the father comes into the ring and takes the mic and starts announcing everything to the crowd, and the brothers are surprised by a lot of the things he's saying, but the focus stays on the father. But the brothers in the background are reacting to all of this, and Zac Efron's reactions in particular, because Zac Efron is incredible in this movie. His reactions to this guy, his father, are so tragic and heartbreaking, but the camera doesn't focus on it once, because that's not what the world was focusing on. I think it was a brilliant shot, and if anything sums up the film in one shot, it would be that. There's so many shots in this movie that are like that, but that shot in particular just really encapsulates everything that this film was about. I found this film to be an extremely emotionally cathartic experience that dissects violence and masculinity in a way that I have not seen done before, and it was very innovative, and I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed it. One of the most unique films of the year, May December produces three towering performances out of the three leads and consistently and flawlessly blends hilarious comedy with dark, brooding tragedy. There's a lot about this film that can be hard to watch. There's this constant underlying feeling of dread that you can't quite put your finger on. Something's happened to these people beyond the surface of what we've been told, and you haven't quite figured it out yet, and you're not sure if you ever will figure it out, but the film lets you know it's there. So you're constantly uncomfortable and you're constantly worried that something's about to explode in front of you. And it doesn't always do that. It consistently tightens the rubber band, and it almost never snaps, and so it makes everything very, very uncomfortable for the audience. It's paced perfectly, it has a gorgeous score, and an extremely clever and ingenious script. It's on Netflix now, so you have no excuse not to watch it. Give it a try. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it. The Holdovers really snuck up on me this year. I had heard whispers about this film through various festivals, but I'd never really seen any trailers, and I had only just seen this shot of Paul Giamatti about 5,000 times. It's a repeat of the Killers of the Flower Moon and the Whale memes. This was the only shot and the only impression I really had of the entire film. So I didn't really know that this was out until it was out, and I'm so glad that I was able to see this in a theater on like a cold, dark, gloomy day, which is the perfect environment for this film. And I'm really glad that now in award season, this film is getting its flowers, because I could really see how something like this could be swept under the rug due to how little it was promoted. Despite how accessible it is, I just didn't think that this film would be getting the amount of praise and public recognition that it is, but I'm really happy that it is. It's a film that speaks to the part of ourselves we're not always comfortable with sharing. It encourages us to be a little bit more loving and forgiving and helpful to our fellow man, especially around the holiday season. And it also manages to be side-splittingly funny while it's doing it. Not to mention, it's also one of the most beautifully shot films of the year, just without even trying. It's not trying to be flashy, it's not trying to be cool, but it just looks gorgeous. It looks like something that would come out in the 70s. Every now and again, culturally, there's a film that really cements itself as a yearly tradition. The last time I thought I saw this happen was with Knives Out, and 5 years later, I think we've got another one with The Holdovers. Yet another surprise, Talk to Me genuinely freaked me the fuck out. And whenever a horror film can genuinely get under my skin like that, I know that it's something really special, because horror is simultaneously one of the most done to death genres and also one of the most consistently untapped genres in terms of fear factor. It's honestly the genre that I believe it's easiest to get lazy in. And with Talk to Me, it still utilizes a lot of those cliches and conventions you might come to expect from a modern horror film. And with that, it's easier to get butts in seats like that, and this film knows that, but it also knows that it needs to make these things its own. And it does that with flying colors. I was consistently surprised with the various techniques that the directors were able to experiment with and successfully experiment with in this film. There's a lot of swings taken here that I really, really liked. There's a few select moments here in particular where the makeup is so good and the sound design is so nails on a chalkboard-esque and the directing is so sharp and masterful at times that it really made me forget that I was watching a horror movie. It really, really got under my skin, and that ending is just perfect. And the biggest reason why is that it wraps up its story very well without too many loose ends. There's a couple, but not too many loose ends. But it still allows the possibility for 10,000 more movies like every studio wants. But it never feels like that was the film's goal. It never feels like its goal was to set itself up for 9,000 more movies. It can, but its goal here is to tell its own story and wrap it up in a nice way. And it does both wonderfully. And I loved that about this movie. I left the theater so hyped. I wanted 10,000 more Talk to Me movies when I came out of the theater. And that never happens with a new horror film for me. So I was very, very happy. This was a real mic drop of a movie, and I could easily see this becoming a favorite of mine someday. I thought this was spectacular. Both heartbreaking and heartwarming, 1001 was one of the most overlooked films of the year. Tiana Taylor in A Perfect World will definitely be part of the awards conversation. Her character in this film is one that can be a little bit difficult to understand and sympathize with, because the film doesn't always let you in on all of her demons and the things that she's struggling with on purpose, because it wants you to see her through the eyes of her son. On paper, while I'm saying that, it might sound like something that would never work in a film, but it definitely does here. It feels like you're watching it from an outsider's perspective and you're able to just judge everything without ever having some personal connection to any of these people. And that was a really interesting choice. It really forces you to analyze two extreme sides to an argument spectrum that I won't really get into because it's a spoiler for the film. And it never really feels like it's taking some moral high ground stance that it expects you to agree with at the end of the day. It allows you to form your own opinions on this woman, her son, the world around them, and just everything in between. Like I said, this film was extremely overlooked this year. It was streaming on Peacock for a while. I don't know if it still is. It might be on Paramount right now. I don't know, but you should look it up and check it out because I think that this is a nice, easy-ish watch that you'll still be able to get a lot out of. I was actually pretty surprised by the amount of division that Asteroid City seemed to draw amongst Wes Anderson fans. It's not his best film by any means, and it's certainly not his most accessible film either, but it's definitely his most personal and the most outwardly Wes Anderson film in terms of style that he's made. I was thoroughly impressed with how much Wes Anderson was able to cram into this script with such a short amount of time. I loved the characters, I loved the score, I loved the writing, I loved the production design. I thought about themes and ideas that I haven't thought about in a film in such a long time. It has the coolest, freaky little, cute, stilly little guy of the whole year, and at the end of the day, I was just so much more moved by this film than I expected to be. It really snuck up on me in the end. I can understand why structurally this film might not be everyone's thing, because the whole thing doesn't quite exist in the real world of the film. I can understand why that might not be everybody's thing, but the fact that a lot of people that I've seen have been calling this Wes Anderson's worst film is very surprising to me, especially when Bottle Rocket exists. Sorry. John Wick Chapter 4 is the best American action film made since Mad Max Fury Road, and it's frankly not even close to a competition. Is it a little long? Yeah, it probably is, but I don't give a shit. What I love most about all of the John Wick films, but especially this one, is how much genuine fun the filmmakers seem to have topping themselves, and how it never really feels like a chore to them. They constantly want to keep building these action scenes and making them more grandiose and more epic, while still containing a mild sense of realism to them. This film is definitely the most boisterous and out there one out of all of them, but it never reaches anything even close to what something like the Fast and Furious movies would get to. Everything in this film still seems somewhat grounded. Each progressive film in the franchise has gotten a lot more competitive and a lot more complicated in terms of its stunt choreography. Chapter 3 is definitely my least favorite of the bunch. It's definitely a step down in the story department from chapters 2 and 1. But this one is the best of both worlds. It has my favorite story out of all of them. It has my favorite ending out of all of them. It has my favorite progression of the story out of all of them. It has my favorite visuals out of all of them, and my favorite action out of all of them. Best one by far for me. You could take pretty much any scene from this movie and it would most likely contain one of the most beautiful shots of the year and or one of the coolest, most epic moments in action movie history. This one is an absolute all-timer for the genre, and for the sake of its legacy, I really hope they leave it alone and let this one be the final one in the franchise, because I genuinely see no future or world where they could possibly top this. Across the Spider-Verse is one of the most revolutionary movies I have seen in a very long time. It's very rare that I'm watching a new film in the theater and I can physically feel the filmmakers knocking the wind out of me with a choice they make, and Across the Spider-Verse has several of those moments. Seeing this shot in IMAX in particular physically made me lose the ability to breathe for about 30 seconds. The first Spider-Verse film was absolutely trailblazing for the animation medium, and this film not only surpasses it, but somehow manages to leave it in the dust. It is so much fucking fun. One of the most entertaining movies of the whole year. It will melt your eyeballs with its visuals. It's mind-blowing. We got really, really lucky this year with the most popular films of the year because they don't always wind up being very good, but the ones this year also sometimes wound up being the best, and that's always something to be very, very thankful for. If you haven't seen Across the Spider-Verse yet, who are you? What are you doing? Like, everybody's seen this movie. Go watch it now. You're not cool if you haven't seen this. Go watch it. Beyond Utopia is one of the most important films of the decade so far, and by far the most overlooked. It documents the protocols and processes that South Korean liaisons have to help North Korean defectors reunite with their families that are also trying to escape the country. And it focuses on two families in particular in this film. One is a mother trying to reunite with her son, and one is another whole family trying to reunite with the rest of their family outside in a neighboring country. And some of the images that they're able to capture in this film are nothing short of worthy of the Nobel Prize. North Korea as a country has always just fascinated me. I've loved learning about it. I've loved reading as much about it as I can and just really getting to the root of how something like this could actually happen and how people can be so complicit and understanding of something like this. And seeing this film and watching a lot of the things that I've read so much about happen in front of my eyes was a very bizarre experience for me. It was nothing short of just harrowing. I was blown away by this movie. It is extremely moving and more necessary now than it ever has been before. We all know that Marvel has been on its way out for a long time. A lot of the worst movies and TV shows of the past few years have been produced by this anti-art, money-guzzling, soul-sucking piece of shit-ass corporation. But Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 really reminded me why I used to love the MCU. The Guardians movies have always been my favorite of this whole entire franchise because it really just came out of nowhere. They surprised everybody. They have so much charm, they've got amazing visuals, they've got perfect needle drops, and on top of that, and what's most importantly, is they have the most layered characters out of the entire MCU. Most of the characters in these three movies have better arcs over this trilogy than most characters in the rest of the MCU do over 15 to 20 movies. This is highly, highly likely the last truly great movie we're going to get from Marvel in terms of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's a very bittersweet feeling to have. But in the theater, it was an immensely emotionally cathartic experience for me. It made me feel like I was 10 years old again. Yorgos Lanthimos is a completely 100% singular filmmaker. Every single one of his films is wholly original and unique, even if they're based on outside work like this one is. He is completely and utterly unimitatable. I've always deeply admired how much flair he's able to bring to just some of the most mundane shots and scenes in any film, and with Poor Things, he takes that dial and shoots it up to about 10,000. This film has some of the most astounding production, costume, and set design I've seen in such a long time. It feels so real. It never feels like you're on a green screen or on a soundstage or some cheap cardboard set. It's real. Emma Stone gives by far her best performance, one of the most unique performances of the decade so far. I adored her in this movie. Mark Ruffalo and Willem Dafoe are hilarious. The script is insanely packed with dozens of themes that are explored to 100% accuracy. The directing is boisterous, the humor is hilarious, and at times quite subtle. Even if this doesn't seem like it would be your thing because none of Lanthimos' movies are exactly accessible in a lot of different ways, I would still recommend you check this out just so you can bask in the originality of it all and just see something truly unique and its own thing. And it's not trying to be anything else, it's just simply itself. And I think that even if this isn't your thing, that'd still be something you can probably appreciate. This year's Cannes Palme d'Or winner was my favorite recipient of this award since Parasite. Anatomy of a Fall is a very risky movie. Not only does it just go out of its way to make sure the audience never gets any definitive answers about anything this film is trying to explore, but halfway through it becomes almost an entirely different movie. The first half is very focused on the investigation and the crime that's happened, and the second half becomes a very bleak but riveting and intense courtroom drama. Sandra Huller gives one of the best performances of the whole year. She's supported as well by a miraculous script, inventive direction, gorgeous and innovative camera work, and a beautiful story about the themes of justice and the court of public opinion. And there's a doggy, and he's one of the best animal actors I've ever seen, so there's that too. Go watch Anatomy of a Fall just for the dog. He has a lot to do in this movie, you'll like it. Monster was a deeply, deeply raw, moving human film about relationships and childhood and acceptance and shared grief and breaking cycles, just to name a few things. Every single character in this film is immediately identifiable and developed to the nines. Everyone just feels like their own unique person. The performances in this film are incredible. Entire character arcs over the course of the whole film are immediately altered by just slight facial glances or voice changes without the need to say much of anything at all. I cared so deeply about everybody in this movie, and by the time it ended, I left just beaming with happiness. This film constantly surprised me with its brilliant characters, gorgeous direction, luscious cinematography, and a really, really beautiful and unexpected ending. It took me on a journey that I consistently was not able to be ahead of, and I thought that was very, very admirable. We can learn a lot from this one. Martin Scorsese is on his 6th decade of innovating and preserving cinema. There isn't a single human being on this planet that I can say has a more profound legacy on the medium as he does. And for him to be nearly 70 years in and nearly 30 films in and still be taking this many liberties and risks and strides towards improvement makes this one of the most inspirational films for an artist I've seen in years. There is an encyclopedic level of knowledge to be had from nearly every single scene in this movie. There's a new way that he blocks the actors. There's a new place that he puts the camera. There's a new way that he moves the camera. There's a new way he has the actors communicate with each other. Everything feels so fresh and new. This also has one of my favorite endings to a Scorsese movie I've ever seen. It is one of those endings that is so brilliant and so in your face that it almost makes you angry that nobody else has thought of it already because it's that perfect. And the fact that this isn't even in my top 5 Martin Scorsese movies just speaks to the testament of this man's legacy and career and the amount of influence and inspiration he's had over millions and millions of people. Even if it's not his best, this is certainly one of his most daring films in ages, and I will be constantly speaking to his praises. I talked about Oppenheimer over the summer when it first came out in my Christopher Nolan ranking retrospective video, but I've seen it 2 more times since I've made that video, and my admiration and my opinion of this film has only somehow skyrocketed even higher. Without a doubt, this is the most important film of the year, if not the decade so far. There wasn't a single frame in this movie that I felt needed to be added or subtracted from it. It's one of the most tightly paced, edited, and well-constructed pieces of work I've seen in such a long time. Cillian Murphy's performance is obviously stellar, but people have been talking about that for ages. So without throwing him to the side, obviously, I want to make sure that everybody else in this movie gets their flowers as well, because every single performance in this film is awards worthy, even if somebody is on screen for 2 seconds. Emily Blunt might be my favorite performance in the whole movie. Every single scene she's in, she's showing us something new about herself. She's taking a risk that she hasn't taken before. She's showing a side to herself, not just this character that we haven't seen before. Her performance was so fresh, and every single scene it felt like we were seeing her for the first time. I loved her performance. But also like Matt Damon, Florence Pugh, Robert Downey Jr., Benny Safdie, Josh Hartnett, who else? Casey Affleck, Alden Ehrenreich, Jason Clarke, David Dastmalchian, Rami Malek, Kenneth Branagh, David Krumholtz, Tom Conti, like all these people give awards-worthy performances, and that's not even a third of the cast in this movie. It's nuts. Oppenheimer is an absolutely bone-chilling film with supreme, top-of-the-line filmmaking qualities across the board, and I could easily see this being publicly hailed as one of the best movies ever made in the next 10 years or so. In fact, I've already seen a lot of people start to say that already, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them. One of the most impressive feature film debuts I've ever seen, Past Lives, was an unbelievably emotional experience. Everything about this film feels so understated. The directing, the performances, the writing, editing, the cinematography, it all has this air of just quiet to it. The film is also able to project over 20 years of development and relationships over Nora and Hae-sung flawlessly over the course of an hour and 40 minutes, which is not a lot of time. The film also gets increasingly subtle and has so many more blink and you miss it moments of development as the film goes on, and it was so mind-blowing to me how many of these moments would happen over the course of even just a 10-minute sequence. I felt like I was watching real people the whole time, and it's also one of those movies where you kind of know how it's gonna end before you even sit down to watch it, and as opposed to that being a hindrance on the film, as it is with 99.9% of the other films out there, this film knows that you know that and uses it to its advantage to consistently just stretch that rubber band and build to that ending more and more and more, and it makes you wonder how they're gonna present it, and then by the time it happens, you're just, it deflates you so much. It just rips your heart to pieces. And just like everything else, it's not any bigger than any other scene that happens in the rest of the movie. Just because the film is ending doesn't mean anything else in these people's worlds are ending. It's just another day for them. They're gonna go on, they're gonna live, they're gonna have decades more of life, hopefully. So we're just catching a glimpse of that. So even though this feels like such a big moment in this film, and maybe even in these people's lives, it's probably not even gonna crack their top 10 or 5 most important moments of their lives. And it really hurts you to know that, but it's a brilliant, brilliant writing and directing choice. And thankfully now that Barbie has pivoted over to Best Adapted Screenplay for its campaign at the Oscars, this film has a much higher chance of getting nominated and potentially even winning. And if that were to happen, I cannot tell you how happy I would be, because this film deserves every award possible, and it's probably not gonna get any. But if it does, you know how happy I'll be. All right, I hope my number one choice doesn't disappoint you all too much, because this could be seen as a 2022 release for some people because of festival circuits and whatnot, but it was also one of those films that studios were just kind of being like, hey, it'll come out soon, and then it just wouldn't tell you, so it didn't get released in my area until January of 2023. And thankfully I didn't see it until December, because if I had seen this film in January, I would have been constantly chasing the high of this film for the rest of the year, and I never would have been able to reach it. But, you know, here we go. Every now and again, a film will come along that while you're watching it, it becomes increasingly more frightening how similar it is to your own lived experience. It can feel like the filmmakers have peered into your life and are making a film about your most private and vulnerable parts of yourself. And I have never in my life felt that more than with Lucas Dont's Close. This is honestly a pretty difficult movie for me to discuss, because the entire time I was watching it, I was just convinced that the characters in this movie were just clones of myself and the people that I grew up with. I can count 2 to 3 moments in particular where it really almost got too much for me, and I almost had to completely turn the film off, or at least pause it to take a break, because it was just that overwhelming for me. This one really unearthed some parts of me that I really don't like thinking about, and especially don't like wrestling with. But at the end of the day, when the film ended, I realized how rewarding and cathartic of an experience it really was for me. I've seen some people not complain, but for lack of a better term, complain about how they think that this film might be kind of diving into the emotionally manipulative aspects of itself a little bit too much. And I can understand why you would think that, because this is an incredibly sad movie, probably the saddest movie I've ever seen, if I'm being completely honest. But even in those moments, there wasn't a single scene in this movie that I didn't immediately recognize as something that I had experienced myself. Maybe not in the same way that these people have, but in the same vein. Every conversation, every moment, every look, every moment of just quiet, private grief, I related to. And like I said, it was scary at times how similar it was to stuff that I've been through. But at the end of the day, like I said, it was insanely rewarding, and I haven't stopped thinking about it, and I feel like this film really has the potential to obviously shatter hearts, but also mend them. And I think that that's the beauty of what this art form can really do. I don't know if I could ever bring myself to watch this again, but for what it's worth, this was definitely my favorite film of 2023. All right, that's all the films that we have today to talk about. Thank you so much for watching this video and sticking with me and the rest of the film community this year in 2023. Thank you for seeing all of these movies. Thank you for talking about movies with your friends and your family. I am so deeply, deeply in love with this art form, and I'm thankful that I have a platform to talk about it, because not everybody wants to hear me rant about it 24/7, so I'm glad I can talk to a camera every once in a while. I'm so excited for 2024. I'm so excited for all the new opportunities that this industry is going to bring. Despite all of the bad things that may have happened this year in the filmmaking world, we've come out the other side stronger. and we've got a lot of great pieces of work to go with it. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for experiencing film in 2023 as well. Like this video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.